There's no way that you could watch Michael Jordan and LeBron James and think that Michael Jordan is not the GOAT.
LeBron James has spent years benefiting from a level of protection that few athletes ever receive, which is why the recent change in tone feels so noticeable. Whenever LeBron struggled in the past, the conversation often shifted toward another target. The blame would land on the coach, the supporting cast, the front office, the schedule, the matchup, or the idea that he simply needed more help around him. And in many cases, those arguments were justified. But the atmosphere now feels different. The excuses are becoming harder to sell, patience is running out, and even members of the media who once defended him at every turn are beginning to sound more doubtful. That is what makes the current discussion so fascinating. This time, the criticism is not centered on a missed shot or an off-scoring performance. It goes much deeper than that. The focus has shifted to defense, effort, and accountability. The question being raised is whether a 41-year-old LeBron James, who still receives praise for every highlight moment, should also face scrutiny when his energy level drops on the defensive end. And according to the source, that debate is no longer happening quietly. The criticism is growing louder, and more people are beginning to ask the same uncomfortable questions than ever before.
In your best interest to play all 82. Is that something you thought about at all since you made the goal?
That's a goal, but we'll see. But I don't. It's something I ain't discussing right now.
Reports suggest the Lakers held a discussion involving J.J. Redick, LeBron James, and Luka Doncic following a stretch of disappointing defensive performances. Redick has never been afraid to challenge his players, and it appears he wanted greater commitment from his two biggest stars on that side of the floor. That alone says a lot about where the team stands right now. This is not a debate about whether LeBron can still put points on the board. It is not about whether he can still finish a powerful dunk or come up with a highlight reel chase-down block. Everyone already knows those abilities are still there. The real question is whether he is consistently providing the defensive effort the Lakers need from him every night. That is where the criticism becomes much harder to ignore. The source makes a straightforward argument. Whenever concerns about LeBron's defense are raised, the first response is usually his age. He's 41 years old, so expectations should be different. Supporters argue that he is no longer the same athlete and cannot be expected to play every possession with the same intensity he had in his late 20s. On the surface, that explanation sounds completely fair. However, the criticism points to a contradiction. When LeBron throws down a dunk, explodes in transition, delivers a chase-down block, or flashes his athleticism, the conversation immediately shifts to how incredible he is for his age. People celebrate his longevity, call him the greatest player ever at this stage of a career, and use those moments as evidence for his place in the GOAT debate. That leads to a simple question. If he is still dominant enough to receive praise for those athletic flashes, why should defensive mistakes automatically be excused because of age? That is the heart of the debate, and it is a point many people find difficult to dismiss. For years, LeBron has received enormous credit whenever he produces something historic or spectacular. He earns recognition for the moments that leave fans amazed and add to his legacy. Yet when the focus shifts to defensive effort, the conversation often changes completely. Suddenly age becomes the main explanation. Suddenly fatigue becomes the reason. Suddenly expectations are lowered, and many people act as if consistent defense is simply too much to ask because of the miles already on his career.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we came that far, so, trying to see if I can make plays. Obviously my presence on the floor, is key for our ball club, but, I thought the guys did a great job, especially in overtime. I thought Marcus was great in overtime, hit the three, and away from their bench. I think Rui threw it over the top. He hit the three, got to the free throw line, made free throw.
That is the exact point the source is challenging. And it is difficult to completely dismiss the argument being presented. Nobody expects LeBron to defend like Gary Payton in his prime. Nobody is asking him to spend entire games locking up the opposing team's best scorer. Nobody believes he should cover every inch of the floor or move with the non-stop energy of a young superstar. But there is a clear difference between being physically limited and appearing disconnected from the action. There is a difference between managing your energy and looking mentally checked out of a possession. There is also a difference between getting older and simply failing to give maximum effort. That distinction sits at the center of the debate. The source repeatedly emphasizes that LeBron's defensive struggles are not viewed as purely a physical issue. That is where much of the disagreement comes from. If his body simply could not handle those responsibilities anymore, the discussion would focus on aging, reduced minutes, changing roles, and natural decline. Instead, the argument is that he still shows flashes proving he can make elite plays when he chooses to. He can still race back for a crucial stop. He can still rise for explosive finishes at the rim. He can still display the athletic burst of someone much younger than his actual age. That suggests the issue is not solely about physical limitations. According to the source, the bigger concern is decision-making. The criticism is that LeBron appears to pick and choose his moments. Choosing when to push the pace and when to coast. Choosing when to chase a loose ball and when to watch the play develop. Choosing when to rotate defensively and when to remain focused on a previous call or turnover while the Lakers are left defending short-handed. Those are the details fans tend to notice, and once that perception takes hold, defending every mistake becomes much more difficult. The reported meeting with J.J. Redick adds another layer to the story. If the head coach is sitting down with LeBron and Luka Doncic to discuss defensive accountability, it suggests the concerns have moved beyond television debates and social media criticism. It means the coaching staff views the issue as significant enough to address internally. And the idea that Redick reportedly felt the need to challenge a 41-year-old future Hall of Famer about defensive effort says a lot about how seriously the situation is being viewed inside the organization. That is where admiration starts giving way to frustration. The source also argues that the conversation did not end after that meeting. The Lakers managed to get through one game successfully, but subsequent performances reportedly raised many of the same concerns. The defense continued to struggle. Questions about effort remained. The overall picture still looked inconsistent. And within that criticism, LeBron continued to be singled out as a major concern on that end of the floor. The discussion becomes even more intense when advanced defensive statistics enter the conversation. Numbers that once seemed almost untouchable when evaluating LeBron are now being openly debated. For years, many analysts avoided framing his performance through that lens because of everything he had accomplished throughout his career. Now those same topics are becoming impossible to ignore. Fair or not, they have become part of the larger conversation surrounding LeBron and the Lakers as expectations continue to rise.
Michael Jordan has 10 scoring titles. Michael Jordan was a 9-time All-NBA defensive team member. Michael Jordan won 6 titles, 6 NBA Finals MVPs, never once allowed a game to get to a championship series to get to a game 7. Never once. That was in his 13 years in Chicago. We ain't counting the 2 years with the Wizards. He was trying to become an owner, and they needed him to come out of retirement to have an ownership stake. That's what they needed.
And from a Lakers fan's perspective, that is where the frustration starts to build. The team already has enough challenges to deal with. This is not a roster so talented that it can overcome defensive mistakes simply by outscoring everyone every night. They need leadership from their stars. They need commitment from the top down. Most importantly, they need LeBron and Luka Doncic setting the standard on both ends of the floor so the rest of the roster can follow that example. When that standard is missing, the Lakers become vulnerable to exactly the kind of losses being discussed here. Games that should be manageable suddenly become difficult. Competitive matchups turn into blowouts. Opponents gain confidence, and weaknesses become impossible to hide. That is usually where the roster debate enters the conversation. Supporters of LeBron often point to the supporting cast as the main issue. The argument is familiar. The roster lacks depth. The team does not have enough defensive specialists. There are too few dependable role players. The overall construction of the lineup is flawed. And to a certain extent, those criticisms are fair. The Lakers are far from a perfect basketball team. Nobody is seriously arguing otherwise. But according to the source, that is not the real issue being debated. The question is whether roster limitations excuse a lack of effort. And the answer being presented is no. That is where the argument begins to turn against LeBron. Roster concerns may explain why the Lakers are not viewed as championship favorites. They may explain defensive struggles as a team. They may explain inconsistency throughout the season. What they do not explain, according to the criticism, are moments where effort appears to disappear altogether. They do not explain standing behind a play after a turnover instead of sprinting back on defense. They do not explain failing to contest rebounds that could have been secured with extra effort. They do not explain why a player known for one of the greatest basketball minds ever sometimes appears passive in situations that demand urgency. That is where even longtime defenders begin running out of answers. The source also raises another important point. If LeBron truly can no longer handle a significant defensive workload, then the logical solution would be adjustment. Fewer minutes, a reduced role, more carefully managed responsibilities. The kind of approach teams normally take with aging veterans. On paper, that is a perfectly reasonable argument. The problem, however, is that LeBron himself has consistently pushed back against those limitations. The source references previous attempts to manage his workload more carefully, suggesting he was unwilling to embrace those restrictions. His stance has always been that he remains capable of carrying a major role and contributing at a level few players can match. And that position changes the discussion entirely. Because if you insist you can still handle star-level responsibilities, then criticism comes with that territory. You cannot embrace comparisons to your prime when the praise is flowing and then point to age whenever accountability enters the conversation. That is the contradiction the source keeps highlighting. The argument is simple. If the standards remain elite, then the expectations remain elite as well. That may be one reason some media members appear less eager to defend every criticism than they once were. Not everyone has changed their view. LeBron still has enormous support across the basketball world. His accomplishments guarantee that. But people are beginning to notice the same cycle repeating itself. The Lakers struggle defensively. Questions are raised. Explanations emerge. Then a spectacular highlight reminds everyone of his greatness. The criticism fades temporarily. Another loss follows, and the entire discussion returns again. For many observers, that pattern is becoming increasingly familiar. The source also argues that the Lakers are entering a different era altogether. For years, LeBron was unquestionably the center of every conversation surrounding his team. Everything revolved around him. But according to this perspective, that is no longer entirely true in Los Angeles. The franchise is now heavily focused on Luka Doncic. The source presents Luka as the player steering the direction of the team moving forward. LeBron remains a major figure, an elite talent, and one of the most remarkable players ever for his age. But the argument being made is that the spotlight is no longer his alone. The Lakers are increasingly looking toward Luka as the player around whom the future is being built.
Every person in the bubble is under a unique circumstance. Everybody that's in the bubble is not accustomed in a professional career of playing without fans. So, Skip, no one wants to hear why you guys haven't played well, why you haven't shot the ball well, why you haven't looked like the Lakers that gained the number one seed in the West. All they want to hear is, what are you going to do to fix the problem?
That shift matters because it changes what the Lakers should realistically expect from LeBron at this point in his career. They no longer need him to control every possession or carry the entire offensive burden by himself. They do not need him handling every decision like he is the only star on the floor. And they certainly do not need individual numbers to take priority over team success. What they need most is winning basketball. If that requires sacrificing touches, stats, or some of the habits that came with being the centerpiece of a franchise for 2 decades, then that is simply part of evolving within a team structure. That is the central point the source keeps returning to. The Lakers are trying to compete as a team. Their purpose is not to serve as a showcase for LeBron's legacy or personal achievements. The goal is to win games and contend at the highest level. From that perspective, roster flaws are not an excuse for selective effort. If the team already has weaknesses, then every player, especially its biggest stars, has an even greater responsibility to contribute in ways that impact winning. The criticism being made is that coasting on one end of the floor while expecting praise on the other is not a formula that helps a team reach its potential. Either the effort is helping the group succeed, or it is not. It may sound harsh, but that standard applies to every superstar in the league. The source pushes the argument even further. It suggests that if LeBron genuinely can no longer handle the basic demands required of a player in his role, then difficult conversations become unavoidable. That may sound extreme, but it is part of a larger question about aging athletes and expectations. At what point does a player reduce responsibilities, embrace a smaller role, or consider stepping away altogether? Those are questions every all-time great eventually faces. According to the source, the possible paths become fairly straightforward. Either LeBron adapts to the limitations that naturally come with age, reduces his workload, or continues proving he can meet the standards expected of a player receiving major minutes and major responsibility. The debate ultimately comes down to accountability and expectations. The higher the role, the higher the standard. If you enjoyed this breakdown, be sure to subscribe for more NBA analysis, LeBron discussions, and deep dive basketball content. And let us know your thoughts in the comments, because the conversation surrounding LeBron's defense and overall impact is becoming one of the most talked about topics in basketball.